What does your worst nightmare look like? This is what mine does. My name is Harris Hart Silver, and since the fires, I've become a voice for the people in Los Angeles quite accidentally. So I felt in my bones. I was in New York City for 9/11, and when I woke up the morning after the fire, not knowing it was still raging, I felt that I needed to see what had happened for myself. So I jumped on my e-bike and I went straight up to the Palisades, and I couldn't believe what I saw. It was just devastation like Hiroshima without the radiation. I saw a news crew doing a fake story, and I got really upset. So I just started posting, and I'd never been posting, and it just sort of called me. It wasn't something that I was looking for. So I've been very fearless about telling the truth in this horrible situation. And what we've all awakened to in Los Angeles is the absolute, while the fires were devastating, it's not the fires that's caused the problems here. It's the lack of government leadership, mismanagement, incompetency, and I believe there's also corruption involved as well. And it's very, very dangerous for society. And so I've just been a voice in this, and very, very specifically, a very vocal voice about what's been happening at the ocean. And because of me, I think a lot of people know now that between Carbon Beach and Big Rock and Malibu, there's approximately 195 houses that have been laying in the beach for, we're going on 3 months now. But last Sunday I filmed, it was just horrific, but I filmed a sea lion in the debris, and there was nothing we could do. It's a wild animal, it's hundreds of pounds, and it's really, really brutal. But CBS National News saw what happened, and so they're doing a story. So I think I've done as much as an individual can to bring awareness to the horrible condition of the oceans. And so hopefully now that people will be paying attention to it. But this needed to be treated like an oil spill, and it just is complete negligence. None of this needed to happen. And what people have to understand, with every high tide for the last 3 months, that there's been poisons going into the ocean because this debris hasn't been cleaned up, and it's catastrophic. A couple miles west of the PCH, there's another highway, and it's a highway of whales moving up and down the coast to their breeding grounds and their reproductive grounds. And I think we've had 5 dead whales wash up since the fires, but one of the dead whales, a Dockweiler, was a rare pygmy sperm whale, and there was no contusions on her body. And she literally came up onto the beach unable to breathe. And when they did the autopsy on her, they realized she was pregnant. So is it 5 whales or 6 whales that have died? And this is outside of domoic acid, which people are using. It's just devastating. And this is all completely unnecessary. And what people have to understand also is that, given the same density and the same population, if this happened 100 years ago, we wouldn't be in this problem, because all of materials would be compostable. And we're awakening to just, really a government, a government that just doesn't serve the people in any way. And so, this really, really needs to change, because it's hurting society. I was in New York during 9/11, so I have that parallax in my head of, a city that was under attack. But what we had in 9/11, we had amazing leadership with Mayor Michael Bloomberg, who is a genius of a manager, and we don't have that here. And I think it's it's a quite noticeable difference, and it's very, very concerning and very dangerous to society. I was one of the only people in the courtroom when the city of Calabasas tried to get a TRO against the dumping of toxic waste in the Calabasas dump. And it was shocking to hear how our tax dollars were spent by the county to hire an aggressive law firm that argued against public health. And it's just shocking. It's not, a lot of people say, how come they aren't doing it, cleaning up? And that, it's the wrong question. The question is, why are they working, to hurt the public and the environment so much? And this is something that people really, really need to wake up to understand what's happening, because it's truly unimaginable. Yeah, so what do I think is going to happen next? The people need to come together, and sort of fix this. And by fixing that, it's just not an issue of replacing one elected official to another, but to actually demand that the system that we all live under is responsive to society's needs. It doesn't serve society in any way, and this is sort of the great awakening that so many of us are seeing after the fires. And I think in terms of, if I could do one thing, so much of this is because of Governor Newsom, and he could fix things with 3 executive orders. What most people don't understand is that all of these hard-fought environmental laws were suspended by the governor with executive order, and these environmental laws that are so necessary, were suspended at the time of a massive ecological disaster. And so it's a huge mistake. And so we need these environmental laws. We need the Clean Air Act. We need the Endangered Species Act. We need these laws that protect society and the environment. And so the one thing the governor could do is he could reinitiate the laws. The governor came in and said, I'm going to have a Marshall Plan, and then left. We haven't seen Governor Newsom. And so what Governor Newsom needs to do is he needs to actually marshal resources to clean up the beaches. And when I say clean up the beach, I'm talking about houses sitting on the beach 3 months after a fire. I'm not talking about a piece of trash. There's literally toxic debris in the beach, and it needs to be cleaned up in the same way that an oil spill was. And then, I hope that other people get behind me in terms of these organizations, but the governor needs to call for no rebuilding of private homes in the intertidal zone. When you look at some of where these houses were, it's very clear that they should have never been built, and they should not rebuilt. The pilings of the homes don't sit on land, they sit on the beach, actually above the beach, and the pilings of many of these homes that you could witness now are underwater at high tide, and this is a marine habitat. And that's part of the devastation of seeing the sea lion, of basically its habitat being completely destroyed. But even with the houses, we're, taking away habitat. There's a beautiful species of fish that only reproduces in Southern California and Baja California, Mexico, called the grunions. And it's a spectacle. They come out of the water to reproduce, and the species will become extinct if we continue doing what we're doing. They need their habitat back, and the tide pools are all a mess. And not only is there toxic debris in the tide pools and sharp objects, but they're lifeless. Instead of these areas that should be teeming with biodiversity, there's really nothing going on. The last time I was in the tide pools, I saw a sea anemone, and that was it. And these things should just be busy with life, hermit crabs and shrimp hopping and there's just nothing in them. So we really need to engender biodiversity. And one of the issues too is when you think about the testing, we're testing for all these toxic materials which are in the air, they're in the soil, they're in the water, but we also have to look at life. My question is, you have an organization that's called Heal the Bay. They haven't come out publicly and said no rebuilding of homes in the intertidal zone. And how could you heal the bay if you can't kind of come up with something that's just so common sense? You can't heal the bay if the habitat is destroyed and the intertidal zone is under stress. And then even with the rebuilding, there needs to be a conversation of the type of materials, because it's very important for people to understand that we're not here because of the fires. The fires themselves are part of the life cycle in Southern California. The chaparral, the oaks, they all reproduce because of fires. Fires are actually healthy. It's what the fires burned that we're dealing with. And so we need to never be in this situation. And this goes east of the PCH. The Palisades, in any community where the water is connected to the ocean, we have to change the materiality that we're building with. Just so everyone knows a little about me, I'm in the 1%, but I'm not in the 1% for money. I'm in the 1% of spending time in the ocean. So I spent a lot of time in the ocean for a Jewish kid that was born in Montreal. I go in the ocean 2 or 3 times a week regularly, and I really understand it and feel it and commune with it and know its moods. I haven't been in the ocean since the fires for obvious reasons. But so when I talk about the ocean, I'm not an oceanographer or a scientist, but I know it in a different way. You think of the ocean as something that holds life, but the ocean itself is alive, and there's a hidden umbilical cord between the ocean and humanity. And if the ocean isn't healthy, society and individuals can't be healthy. And we've been really, really, really basically poisoning and killing the ocean. And we see it, right? There's been, because I'm a voice, I become a voice people write to me all the time. So starting on March 14th, I started getting people writing to me all up and down the coast about marine mammals that are coming up dead and sick. And it's not just marine mammals. There's been, and by marine mammals, let me be very specific, baby dolphins, sea lions, baby sea lions, seals, but also there's been people who have sent me photos of leopard sharks, and then we have birds falling out of the sky, and then we have whales. So it's very, very heavy duty what's happening, and it's because of us, you know. And even if you say, oh, it's domoic acid, yes, algae is these algae blooms are part of the cycle, but no one that I know, and I'm not a kid, has ever seen anything like this. And to say it's just domoic acid and leave it is to really not understand the ecological issues that we're dealing with. And the ecological disaster that we're dealing with is very, very difficult to see because it's so big. But I've had fishermen write to me telling me that they're seeing debris in the Channel Islands, so that's 50 miles west of the PCH.
That's from this fire?
That's from this fire. We know the RF Lasker, which was a Scripps research boat, was out 70 miles on the night of the fires, and their scientists on board described it basically a snowstorm of toxic ash 70 miles out at sea, with some of the debris being 5 centimeters, so it's about 2 inches. And then we know from the kelp arc, people who are doing some work on restoring the kelp, that when they put a camera under the water at Big Rock after the fire, there was 3 feet of debris in the water column. And you know, the way that the water column works, it's this sort of, in the channel out here is very, very deep. It's about 3,000 feet deep between here and Catalina. And that basically there's a throughout all of geological time, there's been a falling of organic matter that feeds all of life in the ocean. And we've just, previously we've introduced microplastics into it, but now we're introducing all of this toxic material that goes all throughout the food chain. And, the amount of chemistry and biological interactions that is happening, I mean, it's, I'm not an ocean chemist, but it's quite obvious. And it's very, very significant. And, we really need to do better. And what I specifically mean by that is we need to protect the ocean moving forward. And I've been working on a plan with some very talented people to have this vision to come out of the ashes of protecting the ocean moving forward. And it starts with no rebuilding on the intertidal zone and restoring habitat on the intertidal zone, and then building a linear park between Santa Monica and Malibu with a botanical corridor that you could cycle in. And so imagine cycling through the city in what would be a garden, not a painted line on the side of the road. So you can move all throughout the coast safely by human locomotion. And I think this is really, it would be so beneficial to the city, so necessary, and it's a vision moving forward. So this is what I'm working on with some very, very talented people that we're hoping to introduce to the entire city. But there's no mechanism to discuss urban ideas that benefit society. And, so it's very, very difficult, and we're working against basically greed. We need to do something positive that comes out of this horrific situation. If you want to stay involved with this vision, follow abracadabra_LA. We need to change the system so that this government that we all live under starts serving the people in a way that makes sense for society. What are you fishing for? I'm gonna give you some unsolicited advice. Any fish that's not migrating, that's moving up or down, you don't want to eat it right now. Yeah. It's just everything in the water is really bad. Yeah.
Very emotional. Here we go. Yikada Shemei Rabba Ba'amad Divrei Kirutei Ve'imlach Machutei Bechekon V'mechekon V'ubechei B'chal Beit Yisrael Ba'agla Uzman Kiri V'imru Amen Yihei Shemei Rabba Barach L'olam Omei Almaya Yivarach V'yishabach V'yitabar V'timraman V'hidanasha V'tadar V'tileh V'hila Shemei Kachrat V'irhu Ve'olam Mikol Le'alei u'galei machol brachot u'shapakot t'shabatach v'techamata jamra be'alma v'imru amen yehi shalama rabba min shemayim d'chaim aleinu b'kol Yisrael v'imru amen aseh shalom b'imramav u'yaseh shalom aleinu b'kol Yisrael v'imru amen.